American Prometheus, The Triumph and Tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer, by Kai Bird and Martin J. Sherwin. Hello, my friend. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're diving into a life so grand, so brilliant, and so heartbreaking that it reads like ancient mythology. Picture a man who reached for the heavens, seized fire from the gods themselves, and then watched in horror as the world turned against him for what he'd unleashed. But here's the thing. This isn't mythology. This is the real story of J. Robert Oppenheimer. Let me set the scene. It's 4 days before Christmas, 1953. A car speeds through the cold streets of Washington, D.C. Inside sits a man whose mind is spinning. He's one of the most celebrated figures in America, the so-called father of the atomic bomb, a war hero who graced the covers of Time and Life magazines. Yet moments ago, someone handed him a letter declaring him a threat to national security. He turns to his companion and whispers, "I can't believe what is happening to me. How did we get here? How did the brilliant mind behind the Manhattan Project, the man who helped end World War II, become persona non grata, hunted by the very government he dedicated himself to serving?" That question sits at the beating heart of the book we're exploring today, American Prometheus, by Kai Bird and Martin J. Sherwin. This isn't your typical biography. This is the definitive account, born from 25 years of painstaking research. It won the Pulitzer Prize, and once you hear this story, you'll understand why. Here's my promise to you. By the time we're done, you won't just know the facts of Oppenheimer's life. You'll feel the crushing weight of his choices. You'll understand the razor's edge between genius and morality, between soaring ambition and stubborn integrity. This isn't merely the story of a scientist. It's a profound exploration of what it means to be human when humanity has gained the power to destroy itself. As the authors put it, this story doesn't just inform us, it haunts us. So let's begin. Let's trace the extraordinary journey of the man who gave us atomic fire, and then spent the rest of his life desperately trying to warn us about the inferno we'd lit. Our story begins not in some secret laboratory, but in a luxurious Manhattan apartment overlooking the Hudson River at the dawn of the 20th century. J. Robert Oppenheimer was born into spectacular privilege. His father, Julius, was a self-made German immigrant who'd built a fortune in textile importing. His mother, Ella, was a sensitive, sophisticated artist with an extraordinary collection of European paintings, including 3 Van Goghs hanging casually in their living room. Young Robert was, in his own cutting words, an unctuous, repulsively good little boy, but he was also a prodigy. By age 10, he was studying physics and chemistry. At 12, he was delivering lectures on geology to the New York Mineralogical Club, standing on a wooden box so the audience of grown men could actually see him over the podium. His parents, especially his mother, wrapped him in protective layers, shielding him from the rougher edges of the world. He had a chauffeur, maids, a summer estate on Long Island where he learned to sail. But this cocoon came at a steep price. It left him, as he later confessed, with no normal, healthy way to be a bastard. He was socially awkward, emotionally fragile, and painfully aware that his intellect set him apart. A defining influence was the Ethical Culture School, founded by the humanist Felix Adler. The school's motto was, "Deed, not creed." Here, young Oppenheimer learned that a person's worth isn't measured by their beliefs, but by their actions and commitment to social justice. This moral framework, this sense of duty to humanity, would become both his North Star and his torment. But outside those protective walls, the world showed its teeth. At summer camp, sensing he was different, the other boys tormented him relentlessly. One night, in an act of shocking cruelty, they dragged him to the camp ice house, stripped him naked, beat him, painted his genitals green, and locked him inside overnight. He was just a boy, and he endured it in stoic silence. He never told his parents. He stayed at the camp until summer's end. This incident revealed something essential about Oppenheimer's character: a brittle exterior hiding a will of absolute iron, a stubborn pride that would resurface throughout his life. After blazing through Harvard in just 3 years, graduating summa cum laude, he set off for Europe, the epicenter of the new world of quantum physics. He knew this was his destiny, but his journey into science began with a descent into personal hell. He arrived at Cambridge University in England in fall 1925, hoping to study under the legendary Ernest Rutherford. Rutherford rejected him. Instead, he found himself assigned to a dusty basement laboratory, doing the tedious work of preparing thin beryllium films. He was clumsy, hopeless at it, and miserable. "I am having a pretty bad time," he wrote to a friend. "The lab work is a terrible bore, and I am so bad at it that it is impossible to feel that I am learning anything." The intellectual frustration unleashed a crushing depression. Friends witnessed him collapsing to the floor, groaning in anguish. He experienced what he called deep, deep depressions. He felt like a complete failure, and his emotional state became so volatile that he did something truly shocking. His tutor at Cambridge was a brilliant young physicist named Patrick Blackett. Oppenheimer admired him immensely, but also felt inadequate beside him and intensely jealous. Consumed by these dark feelings, he took an apple, laced it with toxic chemicals from the lab, and left it on Blackett's desk. Fortunately, Blackett never ate the apple. But university authorities discovered what had happened. Expulsion seemed certain. Criminal charges were a real possibility. Only through frantic intervention by his father Julius, who rushed to England, was a deal struck. Robert would be placed on probation and required to see a psychiatrist in London. But the crisis was far from over. During Christmas holidays in Paris with his parents, his despair deepened further. In a moment of rage and jealousy over his friend Francis Ferguson's engagement, he lunged at Ferguson with a trunk strap and tried to strangle him. Ferguson managed to break free, and Oppenheimer collapsed on the floor, sobbing. He was a young man losing control, and he knew it. As he confessed to an old teacher, his breakdown was caused by the, quote, awful fact of excellence, combined with my inability to solder 2 copper wires together, which is probably succeeding in getting me crazy. His salvation came not from psychiatry but from physics itself. He abandoned the tedious laboratory work and traveled to Göttingen, Germany, the world's epicenter of theoretical physics. And there, everything transformed. In Göttingen, surrounded by giants like Max Born, Werner Heisenberg, and Paul Dirac, Oppenheimer discovered his true calling. This wasn't about soldering wires. This was about the beautiful, abstract architecture of the universe. Quantum mechanics was a boy's physics, and he was one of its most brilliant young practitioners. He underwent a complete metamorphosis. The shy, awkward boy from New York became confident, focused, even a touch arrogant. He would interrupt his own professor, Max Born, to stride to the blackboard and announce, "This can be done much better in the following manner." He published an astonishing 16 papers in just 3 years, including groundbreaking work that remains foundational in quantum mechanics. He'd found his intellectual home. He'd triumphed. The awkward prodigy was becoming a charismatic leader. When he returned to America in 1929, he accepted a unique joint appointment at UC Berkeley and Caltech. His mission, to bring the new physics to America. At Berkeley, he built the nation's most formidable school of theoretical physics. His graduate students absolutely adored him. They called him Oppie. They mimicked his mannerisms, his characteristic nim-nim-nim hum while thinking, his chain-smoking of Chesterfield cigarettes, even his peculiar jerky walk. He was their Pied Piper. But as his professional life soared to dizzying heights, another part of his soul was awakening. The Great Depression was devastating the country. He watched his brilliant students unable to find work. In Europe, Nazism was rising like a dark tide, and his own relatives in Germany were forced to flee. The world of abstract physics was no longer enough. The lessons of the ethical culture school, deed, not creed, came rushing back with force. And then he met Jean Tatlock. She was brilliant, beautiful, deeply melancholy, a medical student at Stanford and a passionate, dues-paying member of the Communist Party. Robert fell deeply, desperately in love. A friend would later observe, Jean was Robert's truest love. He was devoted to her. Through Jean, Oppenheimer's political consciousness awakened. He was drawn into the vibrant, left-wing world of 1930s Berkeley. He attended fundraisers for the Spanish Republic, fighting desperately against fascism. He began donating substantial sums, about $1,000 annually, to the cause, funneling money directly through Communist Party channels, as advised by Jean's mentor, Dr. Thomas Addis. He became friends with known communists like Håkon Chevalier. He later testified that he was never a card-carrying party member. He called himself a fellow traveler, but for a time, his heart belonged to the cause. As he explained it, I liked the new sense of companionship, and at the time felt that I was coming to be part of the life of my time and country. This was the man in 1942, a world-renowned physicist at the absolute peak of his intellectual powers, and a man deeply engaged with the great political struggles of his era. And it was precisely this man that the United States government would ask to lead its most secret, most urgent, and most terrifying wartime project. In September 1942, a gruff, overweight, supremely capable Army engineer named Colonel Leslie Groves took charge of what would become known as the Manhattan Project. Groves was everything Oppenheimer wasn't: pragmatic, authoritarian, deeply conservative. His job was to build an atomic bomb, and he needed a scientific director to orchestrate the effort. Nearly every senior scientist he consulted advised strongly against Oppenheimer. He had no Nobel Prize, he had no administrative experience, and most troubling, he had a thick security file documenting his numerous left-wing associations. One Berkeley colleague quipped, "He couldn't run a hamburger stand." But Groves saw something different. He saw genius, certainly, but he also recognized what he called overweening ambition. It was a quality he trusted. He sensed that Oppenheimer's ambition, his desperate hunger to succeed, would guarantee his loyalty. In what even his own friends would later call a real stroke of genius, Groves chose Oppenheimer. And so Oppenheimer embarked on his new life. He proposed a radical concept: gather all the top scientists in a single, secret laboratory in a remote location. He knew exactly the place, a desolate mesa in New Mexico he'd discovered on horseback rides as a young man, a place called Los Alamos. Over the next 2.5 years, Oppenheimer performed nothing short of a miracle. He transformed that pristine mesa into a secret city, a bustling laboratory that would eventually house thousands of people. And he transformed himself. The eccentric, often arrogant professor became a masterful, charismatic, profoundly inspiring leader. He never dictated what should be done, his colleague Hans Bethe remembered. He brought out the best in all of us, like a gracious host with his guests. Robert Wilson, a young physicist who initially disliked him, found himself transformed in Oppie's presence. "I became more intelligent, more vocal, more intense, more prescient, more poetic myself." His leadership proved essential. He understood every facet of the project, from the most esoteric theoretical physics to the grittiest engineering challenges. He settled disputes, soothed egos, and kept the entire sprawling enterprise laser-focused on a single goal: building the bomb before the Nazis did. The moral weight of their task was never far from their minds. That weight grew heavier in December 1943, with the arrival of the great Danish physicist Niels Bohr, smuggled out of Nazi-occupied Europe. To the young physicists at Los Alamos, Bohr was a god, and Oppie was his prophet. Bohr was the one who forced them to truly confront the world they were about to create. He asked Oppenheimer a deceptively simple question: is it really big enough? He meant, would the weapon be so powerful, so utterly terrible, that it would make all future wars unthinkable? This question planted a seed in Oppenheimer's mind, a seed that would grow into a profound, lifelong mission to control the monster he was helping to birth. The work intensified. By summer 1944, they faced a crisis. It became clear that a plutonium bomb, one of two designs they were pursuing, couldn't be built using a simple gun method. It would fizzle. The only hope was a radical, unproven concept called implosion, symmetrically crushing a sphere of plutonium to achieve critical mass. Many, including James Conant, urged a cautious approach, but Oppenheimer gambled everything. He reorganized the entire laboratory, pouring all resources into solving the implosion problem. It was an audacious bet, and it paid off spectacularly. By summer 1945, they were ready. A site in the New Mexico desert, which Oppenheimer codenamed Trinity, was prepared for the test. On the night of July 15, 1945, a violent thunderstorm raged over the test site. The team was exhausted, nerves frayed to breaking. Fermi was taking side bets on whether the explosion would ignite the atmosphere itself. Oppenheimer, gaunt and sleepless, paced anxiously. At precisely 5:29:45 a.m. on July 16th, the world changed forever. A flash brighter than 1,000 suns illuminated the desert sky. A tremendous ball of fire rose, shifting from white to yellow to an unearthly, brilliant purple. A minute later, a thunderous roar echoed across the mountains. It had worked. Frank Oppenheimer, standing beside his brother, remembered them simply saying, "It worked." Robbie saw Robert emerge from a car shortly after, and the way he walked, the confident stride of a man who had accomplished the impossible, was something Robbie would never forget. Later, Oppenheimer would say that in that moment, a line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, flashed through his mind: "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." But another colleague, Ken Bainbridge, turned to him and said something far simpler, perhaps more honest: "Now we're all sons of bitches." The euphoria of that moment proved tragically short-lived. In the days that followed, as he issued instructions for the bombing of Japan, a deep gloom settled over Oppenheimer like a shroud. His secretary witnessed him pacing, muttering to himself about those poor little people, those poor little people. On August 6, 1945, Hiroshima was obliterated. 3 days later, Nagasaki followed. The war was over. Oppenheimer was a national hero. But triumph was already turning to ash. His role as the father of the bomb had become a source of deep anguish. On October 25, 1945, he met with President Harry Truman in the Oval Office. Instead of celebrating their victory, Oppenheimer, wringing his hands, told the president, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman was furious. He later told an aide, "I don't want to see that son of a bitch in this office ever again." He called him a crybaby scientist. This meeting marked a crucial turning point. Oppenheimer, the celebrated hero, was becoming Oppenheimer, the troubled conscience. He devoted himself to the cause of international control of atomic energy. He and a panel of experts produced the Acheson-Lilienthal Report, a brilliant and visionary plan to create an international agency that would control all nuclear materials and technology. For a brief shining moment there was genuine hope. But the plan was sabotaged. President Truman appointed Wall Street financier Bernard Baruch to present it to the United Nations. Baruch gutted it, transforming a proposal for cooperation into a demand for American dominance. The Soviets rejected it outright, and the world's best chance to prevent a nuclear arms race evaporated. Oppenheimer was heartbroken. "We're lost," he told a friend. But he refused to give up. He remained an influential government advisor, chairing the General Advisory Committee of the newly formed Atomic Energy Commission. And it was in this role that he made his most powerful enemies. In 1949, after the Soviets tested their own atomic bomb, a powerful coalition of military leaders, politicians, and scientists, led by Edward Teller and Ernest Lawrence, pushed hard for a crash program to build a hydrogen bomb 1,000 times more powerful than the weapon used on Hiroshima. Oppenheimer and the entire General Advisory Committee opposed it strenuously. They argued on technical, strategic, and moral grounds. A hydrogen bomb, they wrote, was a quote, of genocide. Its development would only accelerate the arms race without meaningfully improving American security. But they lost. In January 1950, President Truman gave the green light to the H-bomb program. Oppenheimer's opposition to the super sealed his fate. His enemies, chief among them the ambitious and vindictive chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, Lewis Strauss, were now determined to destroy him. Strauss had disliked Oppenheimer for years. He resented his intellectual arrogance, his political influence, his liberal politics. After Oppenheimer publicly humiliated him during a congressional hearing, Strauss's dislike crystallized into cold, calculating hatred. Working methodically behind the scenes, Strauss began orchestrating Oppenheimer's downfall. He leveraged his connections with FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. He encouraged a former congressional staffer, William Borden, to comb through Oppenheimer's massive security file and compose a formal indictment. The key to the case against Oppenheimer was what became known as the Back in 1943, when he first reported the incident to military security, Oppenheimer, in a foolish attempt to protect his friend Haakon Chevalier, had invented a and bull story. He claimed that 3 scientists had been approached, not just him. He had lied. And though he later told General Groves the true, simpler version, that initial lie now became the weapon his enemies would wield to destroy his character. On December 21, 1953, Lewis Strauss summoned Oppenheimer to his office and presented him with a letter detailing 34 charges against him. He was offered a stark choice: resign quietly or face a formal security hearing. Torn and anguished, Oppenheimer refused to resign. "This I cannot do," he wrote. "To do so would be to accept and concur in the view that I am not fit to serve this government." He chose to fight. It was a fight he could never win. The hearing, which began in April 1954, was a sham, a kangaroo court. The prosecutor, Roger Robb, had access to Oppenheimer's entire FBI file, including illegal wiretaps of conversations with his own lawyers. Oppenheimer and his legal team were denied security clearance and access to the very evidence being used against him. For 4 grueling weeks, Oppenheimer was subjected to brutal, humiliating cross-examination. Robb relentlessly attacked his past associations, his opposition to the H-bomb, and most devastatingly, the lies he'd told about the Chevalier affair. Robb pressed, "Isn't it a fair statement today, Dr. Oppenheimer, that according to your testimony now you told not one lie, but a whole fabrication and tissue of lies?" Oppenheimer's quiet reply, "Right. It was a public crucifixion." Friends and colleagues, George Kennan, Hans Bay, Vannevar Bush, John McCloy, testified eloquently to his loyalty and integrity. But it wasn't enough. The verdict came in May. By a vote of 2-1, the board found Oppenheimer a loyal citizen, but a security risk. His clearance was revoked. The lone dissenter, Dr. Ward Evans, wrote a powerful dissenting opinion. To deny him clearance now for what he was cleared for in 1947, when we must know he is less of a security risk now than he was then, seems hardly the procedure to be adopted in a free country. I personally think that our failure to clear Dr. Oppenheimer will be a black mark on the escutcheon of our country. The AEC commissioners, led by Strauss, upheld the verdict 4-1. The lone dissenter there, physicist Henry DeWolf Smith, called the proceeding a, quote, miscarriage of justice. The ordeal was over. Oppenheimer was officially exiled from the government he had served with such distinction. He retreated to his position as director of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. He was, as his friend Francis Ferguson recalled, like a wounded animal. The vibrant, charismatic leader of Los Alamos was gone, replaced by a more somber, reflective, perhaps wiser man. He spent his remaining years as a public intellectual, writing and lecturing on the perilous relationship between science and society. He found refuge on the quiet Caribbean island of St. John in the Virgin Islands, sailing and living a simpler life. In 1963, in a symbolic act of rehabilitation, President Lyndon Johnson awarded him the prestigious Enrico Fermi Award. It was a gesture of reconciliation, but the wounds never truly healed. J. Robert Oppenheimer died of throat cancer on February 18, 1967. He was only 62. His ashes were scattered at sea, in the turquoise waters off the coast of St. John, in the place where he had finally found a measure of peace. What a story. It's almost impossible to believe it's all true. A man of such staggering intellect and profound moral sensitivity, standing at the very center of the most consequential events of the 20th century. American Prometheus is a masterpiece because it refuses to give us a simple hero or a simple villain. It gives us a human being in all his brilliant, flawed, and heartbreaking complexity. Oppenheimer's story is a timeless tragedy, the story of a man who flew too close to the sun. The fire he stole wasn't just nuclear energy. It was a kind of forbidden knowledge of humanity's capacity for absolute self-destruction. And when he tried to warn us, to teach us how to control this terrible new fire, the very system he'd served turned on him and punished him for his foresight. His fatal flaw, if we want to call it that, was an unusual combination of arrogance and naivete. He was arrogant enough to believe he could outsmart his political enemies, that his sheer brilliance would serve as a shield, and he was naive enough to tell a lie, that infamous cock and bull story, believing he could control its consequences. He couldn't. That single lie, told to protect a friend, became the thread his enemies used to unravel his entire public life. So what can we take from this incredible story? I think there are several powerful lessons here. First, There's the lesson about the burden of genius. Oppenheimer's mind was an extraordinary gift, but it was also a source of profound isolation and torment. It set him apart from others and placed on his shoulders a moral weight that few of us can even imagine. His life reminds us that great talent comes with great responsibility, and sometimes that responsibility feels like a cross to bear. Second, there's the devastating lesson about the power of small lies. Oppenheimer's life took its tragic turn not because he was disloyal, but because he was dishonest in a single, critical moment. He tried to be clever, to manage the truth, and it backfired spectacularly. It's a stark reminder that integrity isn't a part-time virtue. The small compromises we make, especially under pressure, can have unforeseen and catastrophic consequences. And finally, Oppenheimer's life offers a profound meditation on the tension between ambition and conviction. He desperately wanted to be an insider, to have a seat at the table where the great decisions were made. And for a time, he achieved that. But that desire for influence sometimes led him to compromise his own judgment, to quiet his own doubts. His story forces us to ask ourselves, what is the price of a seat at the table? And when is it time to walk away, to speak truth to power, even if it means being cast into exile? Oppenheimer wasn't a saint. He was proud, sometimes cold, and he made terrible mistakes. But he was also a man who grappled deeply with the moral consequences of his actions. He tried, in his own flawed way, to steer the world away from the abyss he had helped to open. He gave us the bomb, yes, but he also gave us a powerful and enduring warning about the world it created. And for that, we owe him our attention, our respect, and our memory. That was the story of American Prometheus, by Kai Bird and Martin J. Sherwin. We've touched on the major arcs of Oppenheimer's extraordinary life today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary can only take you so far. The real power of this book lives in the details, in the letters, the private conversations, the rich tapestry of a life lived at the very center of history. It's in the quiet moments of reading that a particular story or phrase will connect with you in an unexpected way. This summary is designed to help you decide if this epic story is worth your time. If anything we've talked about today has resonated with you, I genuinely hope you'll grab a copy. Reading it isn't just learning history. It's an experience that can truly change the way you think about science, power, and the human heart. The link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It lets me know these journeys are meaningful to you, and it ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book. Let's keep growing together. Thank you so much for listening.